The silence was the worst part. It was a cold, heavy thing, a shroud laid over the stone halls of Blackwood Keep. A king's silence. It smelled of dying embers and fear. For 3 days, no one had spoken above a whisper. For 3 days, the heart of the kingdom had simply stopped beating. And for 3 days, Nira Elwood had scrubbed floors. Her knuckles were raw against the gritty stone, the lye soap biting into the cracks in her skin. She kept her head down, her movements small and quiet, invisible. That was the safest way to be. A girl with no wolf, no scent, was a ghost long before she was dead, a blank space in a world brimming with instinct and power. Whispers slithered around her, spoken by guards who didn't see the girl at their feet, and fell at the Battle of the Red River. An arrow tipped in silver, they say. The council is tearing itself apart. No heir. King Valmir Ravencourt. The name was a thunderclap even in a whisper. Nira had never seen him, not really. Only glimpses from a distance, a figure of iron and shadow on a warhorse, a myth clad in black leather and a crown of polished wolf bone. He was the storm on the horizon, the winter that kept their borders safe. Now, the storm was gone, and the silence he left behind was terrifying. "You, girl." Nira flinched, her movements freezing. She didn't look up. Looking up was a mistake. A heavy boot nudged her side, hard enough to make her grunt. It belonged to Gregor, one of the kitchen overseers, a brute of a beta with a sour scent of stale ale and resentment. The High Elder commands everyone to the pyre grounds. Everyone, he sneered, the word heavy with meaning. Even the scentless. He didn't need to say more. Even the worthless. Even the broken. She was an omen. A bad one. A wolfless whelp born under a dark moon. Her presence at a sacred ritual was a stain. Nira rose slowly, her joints aching from the cold floor. She kept her eyes on the flagstones, her worn tunic hanging loose on her. Thin frame. She could feel the stares of the other servants. Pity from some, contempt from most. She followed the river of bodies out into the main courtyard, the biting wind a slap to her face. The entire pack was there. Hundreds of them. Their scents a thick, cloying fog of grief and anxiety. Alphas stood rigid, their power a low thrum in the air. Betas huddled together for comfort. Omegas wept silently, their heads bowed. And Nira? Nira felt nothing but the cold. She was an outsider, looking in, a stone in a river of feeling. She could not smell their sorrow. She could not feel the pack bond fraying at the edges. She was numb, empty. The pyre was a mountain of dark timber in the center of the grounds. Atop it lay the Alpha King, wrapped in the black and silver banner of his house. Even from this distance, his stillness was absolute, a stillness that had broken the world. She found a place at the very back, behind a stone pillar, hoping to disappear. But there was no hiding. A hulking warrior, his face marked with the scars of a dozen battles, turned his head. His nostrils flared. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he looked right through her. Disgust. Her stomach tightened. She shrank back, making herself smaller, wishing the stone would swallow her whole. The High Elder, a frail-looking wolf whose eyes held the wisdom of 100 winters, stepped forward. His voice, amplified by the silent tension, carried across the courtyard. "We gather under the eye of the moon to honor a king," he began, his tone a fragile thread. "Valmir Ravencourt, son of Ragnar, shield of the north. His fire has been extinguished." The words washed over Nira. They were just sounds. The crackling of the torches, the shuffle of feet, the distant cry of a wolf from the forest. Her world was small and gray. It had no room for kings or heroes. It had only the next meal, the next chore, the next averted gaze. The torch was passed. The king's second, a grim-faced alpha, named Kalin, took it. His jaw was a line of granite. His eyes, fixed on the body of his king, were hollowed-out pits of grief. He walked to the pyre, his movements stiff, deliberate. He touched the torch to the oil-soaked wood. For a moment, nothing. Then a flicker. A serpent of orange flame licked up the side of the timber. Then another, and another. The fire caught, roaring to life with a hungry sound, consuming the wood, reaching for the still figure at its peak. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Howls rose, mournful and raw, a chorus of shattered souls crying out to the uncaring moon. The heat washed over Nira's face, a welcome change from the biting cold. She watched the flames climb, mesmerized by the dance of light and shadow. The smoke billowed into the night sky, thick and black. And then, something shifted. The clouds overhead, which had smothered the stars, began to part. A single, perfect beam of silver moonlight broke through. It wasn't soft. It wasn't gentle. It was a spear, a lance of pure, cold light. It didn't strike the pyre. It didn't illuminate the High Elder. It cut through the smoke, through the night, through the hundreds of bodies, and it struck Nira. Pain. White-hot, searing, it slammed into her chest. It was not a burn. It was an invasion, a force that ripped through the emptiness inside her, searching for something that wasn't there. A scream built in her throat, but her lungs had forgotten how to work. The world dissolved into a blaze of silver light. Her knees buckled. She fell, her hands clutching at her chest where the light burned like a brand. And then, the void within her ignited. Mine. The thought was not her own. It was a growl. Deep, ancient, and filled with a fury that cracked her bones. Power, raw and untamed, flooded her veins. It was like a dam breaking, a tidal wave of sensation in a body that had only known deprivation, scent. Suddenly, she could smell everything. The suffocating grief of the pack, the sharp, metallic tang of fear, the wood smoke, the frozen earth, the scent of every single wolf in the courtyard, a dizzying tapestry of life. And beneath it all, a new scent, one that was coming from her. It was the smell of a winter storm, of ancient pines heavy with snow, of cold iron and ozone. It was a scent of dominance, of power, of kingship. It was the scent of Valmir Ravencourt. The beam of moonlight vanished. The pain receded, leaving a humming, terrifying energy in its place. Nira gasped, her lungs finally drawing air. She was on her hands and knees, trembling, the gravel of the courtyard digging into her palms. The howling had stopped. The silence that returned was different. It wasn't empty. It was sharp, brittle, full of 1,000 unasked questions. Slowly, she lifted her head. Everyone was staring at her. The hulking warrior who had growled at her was now gaping, his eyes wide with utter disbelief. His nostrils flared, and a look of confusion, then awe, then terror, crossed his face. He took a staggering step back. His scent, someone whispered. The whisper became a murmur, spreading through the crowd like fire through dry grass. "It's the king's scent!" A new feeling rose in Nira's chest. An instinct that did not belong to her. It was possessive, protective. A low rumble started in her throat, a sound she had never made, a sound she was not capable of making. It was the growl of an alpha, a king. The warrior closest to her, a veteran of the Raven Guard with a jaw of steel, met her eyes. She saw the war inside him, the logic of his mind fighting the instinct of his blood. His blood won. He dropped to one knee, his head bowed, his fist pressed to the ground. A wave of shock rippled through the onlookers. Then another guard knelt, and another. Within moments, the entire Raven Guard, the most elite, deadly warriors in the kingdom, were kneeling, not to the High Elder, not to the burning pyre, to her, to the scentless, wolfless servant girl cowering in the dirt. A cold, sharp presence coiled in her mind. It wasn't just power, not just instinct. It was a consciousness, faded, torn, but there, an echo of a soul, clinging to the life it had been given. His soul. It looked out through her eyes, seeing its kneeling warriors, its grieving pack. A phantom sorrow, immense and crushing, washed through her. It was his sorrow, his loss. Blasphemy! The High Elder's voice cracked like a whip, cutting through the stunned silence. He was pale, his hands shaking with rage. He pointed a trembling skeletal finger at Nira. "This is not a miracle. It is a curse. An abomination of nature," he shrieked, his voice thin and piercing. "That thing has defiled this sacred rite. It has stolen the spirit of our king." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the haze of power. Nira's fear. She was a fraud, a monster, a thief. The elder took a step forward, his eyes burning with righteous fire. "Seize the girl. She is a vessel of darkness. We must cleanse this corruption, before it poisons us all." The command hung in the air. The pack was frozen, torn between the elder's authority and the undeniable scent of their alpha. Kalen, the king's second, rose to his feet. He turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over his kneeling men before finally landing on Nira. His face was an unreadable mask of stone, but his scent, She could smell it now. It was a storm of conflict. Grief, loyalty, disbelief, and a terrifying, cold fury. He started walking towards her. Each footstep was a hammer blow against the silence. The wolf inside her rose up, a wave of pure, possessive rage. It did not fear Kaelin. It did not fear anyone. Mine, the king's echo growled in her soul. This pack, this night, mine. Kaelin stopped just a few feet away, looming over her. The scent of the dead king rolled off her in waves, so thick it was almost visible. He breathed it in, and a shudder racked his powerful frame. He looked at the kneeling Raven Guard. He looked at the terrified High Elder. Then, his gaze fell back to her, and for the first time, she saw the depths of the abyss in his eyes. "What?" he whispered, his voice a blade of ice. "Have you done?" The question was a shard of ice in the fiery chaos. "What have you done?" Nira had no answer. Her throat was a knot of terror, her mind a screaming void. She tried to speak, to whisper an apology, an explanation, anything. But her lips wouldn't move. Her body was not her own. A low growl rumbled up from her chest, an answer she did not give. It was deep, possessive, and utterly defiant. It was the sound of a king who bowed to no one. Kaelin's face, already a mask of grief, hardened into something colder, something dangerous. The flicker of confusion in his eyes was gone, replaced by the chilling certainty of a commander on a battlefield. He was looking at an enemy. He turned his head slightly, his voice cutting through the stunned air, sharp and absolute. "Raven Guard. To me." The kneeling warriors rose as one, their movements fluid, their eyes fixed on him. Their loyalty was a chain, and he held the end of it. "The Elder is right," Kaelin declared, his gaze never leaving Nira's face. "This is an unnatural perversion. But we will not have a panicked execution in the shadow of our king's pyre. We will have answers." He pointed a gauntleted finger at Nira. "Take her, to the silver cells." The word sent a fresh wave of panic through her. The silver cells were legend, a place beneath the keep reserved for rogue wolves, for magic users, for creatures whose power was too volatile to contain, a place from which no one returned. 2 guards stepped forward. They hesitated, their instincts warring with their commander's orders. They could smell their alpha on her. To lay hands on her felt like treason. The king's echo within her felt their hesitation. It surged, a wave of silent command. "Do not touch her." The guards froze, their hands hovering in the air. Kaelin saw it. He saw the power that radiated. From her, the invisible wall of dominance that held his men at bay. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He strode forward, pushing his own men aside. His scent was a blade of cold steel and sorrow. He would not be deterred. He grabbed Nira's arm. His touch was fire. Her touch was ice. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through them both. Kaelin grunted, his grip faltering for a split second. But he held on, his fingers digging into her flesh like iron bands. The king's presence roared in her mind, a silent tempest of fury at being touched, at being handled. But Kaelin's will was stronger. Or perhaps the echo was too weak, too fragmented, to exert true physical control. He hauled her to her feet. She stumbled, her legs barely holding her. For a moment, she was just a girl again. Small, weak, terrified. Then the power inside her asserted itself. Her spine straightened, her head lifted. She met Kaelin's gaze, and it was not Nira, the servant, who looked at him. It was something else. Something ancient and unbowed. He didn't flinch. He simply tightened his grip and began to walk, dragging her with him. The crowd parted. It was like a living wave receding from a stone. The scents, the sounds, they were a crushing weight. Nira could smell their fear, sharp and acrid. She could smell their awe, a sweeter, musky scent. She could smell the High Elder's righteous fury, like dry, burning paper. Every emotion was a physical thing, a taste on the air, a pressure against her skin. They left the courtyard, plunging into the cold stone corridors of the keep. The torchlight threw long, dancing shadows on the walls. Kaelin's pace was relentless. His silence was a condemnation. He didn't take her to the main dungeons. He led her down a winding staircase she had never seen before, a path that spiraled deep into the foundations of the keep. The air grew colder, heavier. It smelled of damp earth and old stone and something else. Something metallic and sterile, silver. At the bottom of the stairs was a single corridor lined with cells. The bars were not black iron. They were a dull, gleaming silver, humming with a faint, almost silent energy. The stone walls were etched with runes that seemed to drink the light from the torches. Kalen stopped before the last cell. He unlocked it with a heavy key, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence. The door groaned open. "In," he commanded. He shoved her forward. She tripped over the threshold, catching herself on the icy stone floor. The door slammed shut behind her. The sound was a hammer blow of finality. The lock clicked into place, a sound like a bone snapping. And then, she was alone. The silence rushed in, absolute and suffocating. The faint hum of the silver bars was the only sound. Kalen's footsteps faded up the stairs, leaving her in the cold and the dark. The strength that had held her upright vanished. The king's presence receded, like a tide going out, leaving behind only the dregs of its power and a hollow ache in her bones. Nira collapsed, curling into a tight ball on the floor. A sob ripped from her throat, raw and broken. It was the first sound she had truly made herself since the moonlight had struck her. She wept. She wept for the girl who scrubbed floors, the girl who knew her place, the girl who wanted nothing more than to be invisible. That girl was gone, murdered by a dead king's ghost. Where did she end and where did he begin? She pressed her face against the frigid stone, trying to feel something that was just hers, the cold, the rough texture, but even that was tainted. Underneath it all, she could feel the thrum of his power, a low vibration deep in her marrow. It was a cage within a cage. Her body held him. The silver cell held them both. Time lost all meaning. It could have been minutes or hours. She lay there, trembling, as the last of her adrenaline faded, leaving only a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. The presence in her was quiet. It was watching, waiting. She could feel it, a cold spot in the back of her mind. It felt ancient, patient, and deeply, deeply possessive of the body it now inhabited. Then, a sound. A single footstep at the top of the stairs. Heavy, deliberate. Nira's head snapped up. Her heart began to pound, a frantic, rabbit-like rhythm. The footsteps descended, slow and measured, each one a drumbeat of approaching doom. A torch appeared, casting a growing circle of light down the spiraling stairs. It was Kalen. He stopped in front of her cell, his face half in shadow, his eyes unreadable pits. He held the torch aloft, studying her as if she were a strange beast caught in a trap. He didn't speak. He just watched. The silence stretched, thin and sharp. The king's echo stirred within her. It was not a violent surge this time. It was a slow uncoiling, a gathering of strength. It pushed back her fear, replacing it with a cold, regal calm. It made her sit up. It made her meet his gaze without flinching. "Who are you?" Kalen's voice was low, rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "Nira," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. It felt like a lie. "Nira," he repeated, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "The scentless Omega. The kitchen servant. You expect me to believe a ghost chose you?" She had no answer. She didn't believe it herself. He took a step closer to the bars, the torchlight illuminating the hard lines of his face. She could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the profound grief. "His scent is all over you," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "It's a mockery, a blasphemy. He is dead. He burned on that pyre. Whatever you are not him. Mine," the voice in her head growled. It was not a word, but a feeling, a primal declaration of ownership over everything he saw. His pack, his keep, his second in command. Kalen must have sensed the shift. His nostrils flared, and he took an involuntary step back. "What is it you want?" he demanded. "Power? A throne? You think this trick will give you a crown?" "I want nothing," Nira breathed. And this, at least, was the absolute truth. "I want to be left alone." "It's too late for that," he said, his voice flat. He was testing her, pushing her, trying to get a reaction, trying to understand the nature of the thing he had locked in his dungeon. He raised his hand and pressed it against the silver bars. They hummed at his touch. "He and we were more than king and second," Kalen murmured, his eyes lost in a memory. "We were brothers. I knew his every mood, his every thought, his every secret. I know him." His gaze snapped back to hers, sharp and piercing. "And you are not him." The echo inside her reacted to the word brother. It stirred a phantom warmth, a flicker of something that felt like affection, quickly consumed by a vast, cold emptiness. Kaelin unlocked the cell door. Nira's breath caught. The sound of the key turning was deafening. He swung the door open and stepped inside, plunging the cell into a cramped intimacy. The space was filled with his scent of steel and grief, and her scent of a winter storm. They were a volatile combination. He stood over her, a mountain of shadow and sorrow. "I am going to find out what you are," he whispered, his voice a raw promise. "Even if I have to tear you apart to do it." He reached for her, not her arm this time. He reached for her face. His calloused fingers were cold against her cheek. She flinched, but the power inside her held her still, forced her to endure the contact. His thumb brushed just below her eye. A spark. A jolt of shared memory. It was not hers. It was his. A training yard. Sun beating down. A younger Kaelin, brash and laughing, is disarmed by a swift move from his king. Valmir stands over him, sword at his throat, a grin splitting his face. "Too slow, brother," he says, his voice full of warmth and life. The vision lasted only a heartbeat, but it was vivid, real. She saw it through the king's eyes. She felt the warmth of that sun. She heard his voice. The memory was a key, unlocking something in the echo. A single word, full of a ghost's affection and sorrow, pushed its way past Nira's lips. It was not her voice. It was deeper, a resonant whisper that was a pale imitation of the king's. Kaelin, his name, spoken with a familiarity that had been earned over a lifetime of brotherhood. He recoiled as if he'd been struck by lightning. His hand flew back. He stared at her, his face pale, his eyes wide with a new, more profound horror. He wasn't looking at a thief anymore. He wasn't looking at a monster. He saw his king's grief staring back at him from a servant girl's face. The name hung in the cold air between them. A ghost of a sound. A key turning in a lock that should have remained rusted shut. Kaelin stumbled back, his shoulder hitting the stone wall of the cell with a dull thud. The torch in his hand wavered, sending shadows skittering like terrified things. His breath hitched. For the first time since the pyre, the mask of command shattered, revealing the raw, wounded man beneath. "No," he whispered. It was not a denial. It was a plea. "Do not say my name." The echo within Nira felt his pain. It was a strange, disembodied sensation, a phantom limb aching for a brother it could no longer touch. The surge of power that had met his aggression now receded, replaced by a vast, hollow sorrow. It was Valmir's sorrow, a king's grief for the life and the man he had left behind. And Nira was trapped in the middle of it. His grief washed through her, cold and immense, and mingled with her own terror until she couldn't tell which was which. "I didn't," she started to say, her own voice a thin, reedy sound after the phantom resonance of the king's. "I don't know how." Silence. Kaelin's command was a reflex, the bark of an alpha accustomed to instant obedience. But it held no heat. Only a desperate, fraying edge. He stared at her, his eyes raking over her face, searching, looking for the trick, the lie, the magic that would explain the impossible. But all he found was a pale, terrified girl in a threadbare tunic, who smelled of his dead king and somehow knew the sound of his name in a voice that was not her own. He pushed himself off the wall, his movements stiff. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, and in a way, he had. "The council meets at dawn," he said, his voice regaining some of its icy control. "They want your head. The elder believes you are a vessel for some dark spirit, a carrion crow that has stolen the king's feathers to trick the pack." Nira flinched. The words were brutal, but they echoed her own fears. Was that what she was? A container for something foul that wore a dead man's memory? "And what do you believe?" she whispered, the question escaping before she could stop it. Kaelin's jaw clenched. He looked away from her, his gaze fixed on the silver bars of the cell, as if they could offer him an answer. "I believe," he said slowly, "that my king is dead. I believe his body burned. I believe his soul is with the ancestors." He took a ragged breath. "And I believe that you are an anomaly that threatens to tear this kingdom apart when it is at its weakest. That is all that matters." He was rebuilding his walls, stone by stone. The commander was replacing the brother. But the crack was there. She had seen it. The echo inside her had felt it. He turned to leave the cell, his movements clipped and efficient. He couldn't get away from her fast enough. "Wait," she said, a new urgency in her voice. It wasn't just fear for her life. It was something else. A need to understand the thing that was living inside her skin. The visions. "I see things. Things he saw." Kalen paused at the doorway, his back to her. He didn't turn around. What things? A training yard. Sunshine, she stammered, trying to describe the memory that wasn't hers. You were younger. He called you brother. His shoulders went rigid. The silence stretched, pulled taut like a bowstring. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, he spoke, his voice low and serrated. That memory is not yours to hold. It is a sacred thing you have desecrated. He stepped out of the cell and slammed the silver door shut. The sound was a final, ringing judgment. He locked it without looking at her. At dawn, the council will decide your fate, he said through the bars. Pray to whatever gods you have left. They are all you have. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing up the stone stairs, until there was nothing but silence and the faint, cold hum of the silver. Nira was left with the ghost of a memory that was not hers, and the chilling certainty of a death sentence. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to find some warmth, but the cold was inside her now. It was the cold of the grave, the cold of the king's empty throne. She didn't sleep. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, fragments of his life flickered behind her eyelids. Not clear visions, just shards of sensation. The weight of a crown on his brow, the feel of a sword grip in his hand, the roar of battle, the scent of a woman's hair on a pillow. The last one came with a jolt of such intense, possessive longing that it stole Nira's breath. It was a memory of love, so sharp and profound it felt like a physical wound. It was not her love, it was his. And the loss of it was an agony that dwarfed everything else. Who was she? The question hammered at her. Who was the woman he had loved? What had happened to her? The echo of the king offered no answers. It was a broken thing, a collection of powerful instincts and fractured memories. It had a will to protect, to rule, but it seemed to lack the coherence of a true soul. It was like living with a storm in her bones. As the hours crawled by, a strange calm settled over her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was joined by a nascent flicker of something else. Anger. They were going to kill her for something she didn't ask for. They were going to destroy her because the moon had chosen her, because a king's ghost had clung to her. She had lived her entire life as a ghost, silent and overlooked. Now, for the first time, the world saw her, and its first impulse was to snuff her out. The king's echo felt her anger and resonated with it. It fed on the spark, fanning it into a low, smoldering fire. It was his indignation, his royal fury at being judged by lesser wolves. When the footsteps returned, she was ready. It wasn't Kalen this time. Two grim-faced Raven Guard warriors stood outside her cell. They did not meet her eyes. Their scents were a mixture of duty and a deep, instinctual reluctance. "The council summons you," one of them grunted, unlocking the door. They flanked her as they ascended the stairs, their hands hovering near the hilts of their swords. They didn't touch her. The king's scent, her scent, was a shield that kept them at a distance. They led her not to the grand throne room, but to a smaller, more severe chamber deep within the keep, the council hall. It was a circular room, tiered with seats carved from dark, petrified wood. At the center was a single stone chair, an interrogation chair. The council was already assembled, 7 of them, alphas and elders from the most powerful bloodlines. The High Elder sat in the central, most elevated seat, his face a mask of cold piety. Kalen stood to the side, near the wall, his arms crossed over his chest. His face was granite, his eyes giving nothing away. He was an observer, a judge. Nira was marched to the center of the room and pushed into the stone chair. It was cold and hard against her back. She was on display, a specimen to be dissected. The High Elder rose, his robes rustling in the heavy silence. "Nira Elwood," he began, his voice dry and brittle. "You stand accused of soul theft, of blasphemy, and of corrupting the sacred memory of our fallen king, Valmir Ravencourt." He let the words hang in the air, a formal declaration of her doom. "You are a wolfless omega, a flaw in the bloodline, an empty vessel. Tell us, what dark bargain did you strike to fill yourself with such a foul mimicry of power?" Nira looked up at him, at the ring of hostile faces surrounding her. Her fear was a frantic bird beating against her ribs, but the king's cold anger was a shield around it. "I struck no bargain," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I asked for nothing. The moon chose me." A scoff came from one of the council members, a portly alpha with a cruel mouth. The moon chooses the strong, the worthy. She does not choose, unrefuse. The insult landed, but the rage that flared was not entirely her own. A low growl vibrated in her chest. She fought it down, but the sound was audible in the quiet room. The council members shifted in their seats, their scents turning sharp with alarm. They could deny what their eyes saw, but their instincts could not deny the sound of an alpha's warning coming from an omega's throat. The High Elder's eyes narrowed. So the puppet has a voice. Or is it the puppeteer who speaks? He leaned forward. We will have the truth. There are ways. Pain can purify. It can burn away the lies and leave only the core of what you are. He was threatening her with torture. The thought sent a spike of pure terror through her. Kalen shifted against the wall. His expression didn't change, but his scent did. A flicker of something. Protective? It was there and gone in an instant. You have no proof of any crime, Nira said, her voice gaining strength from the power thrumming beneath her skin. You have only my existence, and that has always been my crime in your eyes, hasn't it? To be born without a wolf, your existence now threatens the stability of the entire kingdom. The elder snapped. Warriors kneel to you. They smell their king and forget their duty. You are a cancer in the pack bond. You must be cut out. He raised his hand, a signal to the guards. Take her to the cleansing chambers. We will see what truth the silver chains can pull from her. The guards started forward. Panic seized Nira. Her life was about to end in a dark room full of pain, and the king's spirit finally broke its silence. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a vision. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated power that erupted from her. The air in the room crackled, growing heavy and thick with pressure. The torches flickered wildly, as if in a gale-force wind. Her scent, the scent of a winter storm and cold iron, flooded the chamber, a tsunami of dominance that crashed against the senses of every wolf in the room. The guards froze, their hands raised, their eyes wide with instinctual terror. The council members shrank back in their seats. Even the High Elder took a staggering step back, his face ashen. They were not afraid of the Omega girl. They were terrified of the Alpha King, she channeled. Nira rose slowly from the stone chair. She did not feel like a servant. She did not feel like a sacrifice. She felt the weight of a crown she did not wear. Her eyes, which had always been downcast, now swept across the room, meeting the gaze of each council member. There was no fear in them, only judgment. My council, the echo whispered in her soul. My kingdom, my pack. Her gaze finally landed on Kalen. He had pushed himself off the wall and was standing straight, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He was the only one in the room who did not look afraid. He looked devastated. He was watching his king's power being wielded by a stranger, a desecration of everything he held sacred. You will not touch me, she said, and the voice was a strange amalgam of her own and the king's ghostly resonance. You will not chain me, and you will not cleanse me. She took a step toward them, and they flinched as if she had drawn a blade. You speak of the pack, bond, she continued, the words coming to her, given to her by the royal echo within. But you seek to shatter it further with fear and superstition. The kingdom is without a leader. The borders are vulnerable. And you sit here, in the dark, plotting to murder a girl because you are afraid of a ghost. She turned her head, her eyes locking with Kalen's. The challenge was silent, profound. A king speaking to his most trusted commander. Tell me, Commander, she said. The formal title a deliberate choice, a reminder of his duty. What is your counsel? Does the Raven Guard serve this pack? Or does it serve the fear of old men? The entire room held its breath. The decision, the fate of the kingdom, rested on his shoulders. He could side with the council, condemn her, and plunge the pack into a civil war of instinct versus order. Or he could side with her with the impossible, blasphemous thing she had become. Kalen's knuckles were white where he gripped his sword. He looked from the terrified faces of the council to the cold, regal calm on Nira's face. He saw the truth. Not the whole truth, but enough of it. This was not a simple trick. This was not a dark spirit. This was something else. The echo of his king, somehow tethered to the most unlikely of anchors. Slowly, deliberately, he drew his sword. The whisper of steel was the only sound. He did not point it at her. He held it in front of him, tip pointed to the floor, and dropped to one knee. He bowed his head, a commander pledging his sword and his life. The Raven Guard, he said, his voice thick with 1,000 warring emotions, serves the throne. The whisper of steel returning to a scabbard was a sound of finality. It cut through the stunned silence of the council chamber, louder than any shout. Kalen rose to his feet. He did not look at the council. He did not look at the High Elder, whose face was a thunderous mask of fury and disbelief. His eyes were fixed on Nira. "This is not a matter for debate," Kalen said, his voice a low rumble of command that left no room for argument. "It is a matter for the throne. And until the succession is settled, I speak for the throne." He took a step toward Nira. The power that had blazed from her was already receding, leaving her trembling in its wake. The king's righteous fury ebbed, and the servant girl's terror rushed back in to fill the void. Her knees felt weak. The room began to swim at the edges. "The girl will be placed under my personal protection," Kalen announced. He reached her side, and for a terrifying moment, she thought he would grab her again, drag her like a prisoner. Instead, his hand settled gently on her back, a point of heat through the thin fabric of her tunic. It was not a gesture of comfort, it was a gesture of ownership, of claim. He was claiming her for the throne. "Commander, you overstep," the High Elder spat, finding his voice at last. "This is sacrilege. You would protect a monster? An abomination?" Kalen turned his head slowly, his gaze so cold it could have frozen fire. "I would protect the last remnant of my king," he said, his words precise and deadly, "against anyone who threatens it, be they council, elder, or foreign army. Is that understood?" The threat was unspoken but absolute. The Raven Guard was his to command. The heart of the kingdom's military might beat to his drum. No one in the room dared to challenge him further. They averted their eyes, their scents turning sour with impotent rage. Kalen's hand guided Nira, turning her toward the exit. "Walk," he murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. She tried, but the adrenaline crash was absolute. Her legs buckled. She let out a small gasp as she stumbled, pitching forward. He caught her. His arm wrapped around her waist, strong and unyielding, pulling her upright against his side. The sudden, shocking intimacy sent a jolt through her. She was pressed against a wall of hard muscle and worn leather. His scent enveloped her steel, sorrow, and the clean, sharp smell of the winter wind. And beneath it all, she could smell his confusion. It was a scent like ozone after a lightning strike, a sharp electric tang of a world turned upside so down. He held her there for a moment longer than necessary. In that moment, she was not a vessel. She was not a monster. She was just a girl, trembling in the arms of a man who had every reason to hate her. The echo of the king inside her was quiet, but it was not still. It felt a strange, phantom satisfaction. It had entrusted its vessel to the right hands. "Move," Kalen repeated, his voice rougher this time. He half supported, half propelled her from the room, leaving the stunned and furious council in their wake. The corridors of the keep were no longer empty. Servants and guards paused in their duties, their heads turning as the commander strode past with the scentless Omega pressed against his side. Stares followed them like arrows. Whispers erupted behind them like sparks from a fire. Nira kept her head down, her face burning with a shame that was entirely her own. She had never been seen before. Now, she was the center of every gaze. It was a new kind of cage. He did not take her back to the dungeons. He led her up, flight after flight of spiraling stairs, higher into the keep than she had ever been allowed. They passed chambers with heavy oak doors and tapestries depicting the history of the Ravencourt line. This was the domain of alphas, of royalty. He finally stopped before a door at the end of a quiet, secluded hallway. He pushed it open and guided her inside. The room was not the king's grand suite, but it was luxurious beyond anything she could have imagined. A large bed with furs piled high, a stone hearth where a low fire was already burning, a window that looked out over the snow-dusted forest that bordered the keep. It was a room for an honored guest. Kalen released her. She stumbled to the center of the room, feeling small and out of place. The loss of his supporting warmth left her feeling strangely cold. He shut the door, the heavy sound sealing them inside. The world outside vanished. It was just the two of them, the crackling fire, and the ghost that stood between them. "Food and water will be brought," he said, his tone formal again, the commander back in place. "You will remain here. You will speak to no one but me. 2 of my most trusted guards will be posted outside your door. They are not here to keep you in. They are here to keep everyone else out." She nodded, unable to find her voice. She wrapped her arms around herself, a small defensive gesture. He watched her, his expression unreadable. The silence in the room was a living thing. "That vision," he said finally, breaking the quiet. "In the cell. Tell me exactly what you saw." "I told you," she whispered. "A training yard. He disarmed you." He smiled. "His smile," Kaelin said, his voice soft and dangerous. "What was it like?" She hesitated. How could she describe a memory that wasn't hers? She closed her eyes, reaching for the feeling, the impression the echo had left behind. "It wasn't cruel," she said slowly. "It was proud. Like he was proud of how strong you were, even when he won." Kaelin's breath caught. A tiny, almost imperceptible sound. He turned away from her, walking to the window to stare out at the snow. His shoulders were rigid with tension. "Every memory you steal, every word of his you speak, is a dagger in the heart of this pack," he said, his voice thick with pain. "They will see you, and they will see only a perversion of the man they loved. It will break them. I am not stealing anything." The words burst out of her, fueled by a desperation to make him understand. "I am a prisoner here as much as he is. I feel him, like an echo in a cave. An instinct, a feeling. But I don't know his thoughts. I don't know his secrets." "Then how did you know to challenge the council?" He shot back, turning to face her, his eyes blazing. "How did you know to speak of the pack bond? How did you know to call me commander?" "I don't know," she cried, tears welling in her eyes. The words were just, there. He gave them to me. He felt their fear, and he used it. He strode toward her until he was standing just inches away, forcing her to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could smell the anger and grief coming off him in waves. "What does he want?" Kaelin demanded, his voice a low, desperate growl. "What does the ghost of my king want with a scentless Omega from the kitchens?" And then it happened again. A new memory bloomed in her mind, unbidden. It was not a sunny training yard. It was dark. Night. The air was cold and smelled of pine and coming snow. Valmir and Kaelin were standing on this very balcony, looking out at that same forest. They were alone. The king's echo surged, not with power, but with the weight of that memory, of a promise made in darkness. Nira's breath shuddered. Her eyes lost focus, looking past Kaelin, seeing the past superimposed over the present. The king's voice, a true whisper this time, slid from her lips, laced with his phantom sorrow and a chilling resolve. "The border is not the true threat, brother," she whispered, her voice a near-perfect echo of Valmir's. "The rot is within, the whispers in the dark, the lords who smile to my face and sharpen their knives behind my back. They think my bloodline ends with me. They are wrong." Kaelin froze. His face went pale. Every ounce of color drained from him, leaving his skin the color of ash. He stared at her, at the girl who was channeling his king's most secret fears. "If I should fall," she continued, the dead king's whisper filling the room, "you must hold the north. You must protect the throne from those who would devour it. Not for me. For the pack. You swore it, Kaelin. On our mother's grave. You swore." The memory faded. The presence receded, leaving Nira swaying on her feet, dizzy and breathless. She blinked, her vision clearing. She saw the look on Kaelin's face. It was a look of utter, soul-shattering recognition. This was no stolen memory. This was no clever trick. The conversation she had just recited. It was a secret known only to two men, one of whom was now dead. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and cupped her jaw. His thumb brushed against her skin. His touch was no longer cold or clinical. It was searching, reverent, horrified. He was not looking at Nira Elwood anymore. He was looking at the vessel of his king's last will and testament. "He made a promise," Kaelin breathed, the words a ghost of a thought. And Nira knew, with chilling certainty, that the promise he spoke of was not the one the king had just described. It was a new one. A promise Kaelin was making to the ghost staring at him through her eyes. The touch lingered, a brand of heat and trembling awe against her skin. Kaelin's thumb traced the line of her jaw, his eyes lost in the ghost he saw in her face. The commander, the skeptic, the grieving brother, all of it had been burned away by the impossible truth of the king's last words. What was left was a man adrift in a sea of myth and memory. "The promise," he whispered again, his voice raw. Nira didn't know what he meant, but the echo inside her did. It stirred, a flicker of phantom satisfaction, of a duty being honored. It did not offer up the memory. It held its secrets close. Slowly, as if waking from a trance, Kalen let his hand fall away. The loss of contact was a physical shock. The air rushed back into the space between them, cold and sharp. He took a step back, then another, putting distance between them. He needed the space to breathe, to think. He paced the length of the room, his heavy boots silent on the thick furs. He was a caged wolf, trapped between an oath to a living man and the undeniable presence of a dead one. Nira stood frozen in the center of the room, feeling like the eye of a storm. The power of the king's memory had left her hollowed out, a fragile shell. She watched him, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her life was in his hands. It had been decided in the council chamber, but it was being decided again, right here, in the crucible of his belief. What he said, about the rot within, Kalen said, his back still to her. Lord Vorlag, from the Eastern Territories, and Baron Kress, they have grown too ambitious, too hungry. Valmir was planning to move against them after the Red River campaign. He was speaking to himself as much as to her, trying to fit the pieces together. He never told the council, he murmured. He told only me. On that balcony, the night before he rode out, he finally stopped pacing and turned to face her, his eyes burning with a terrible new clarity. No one could know that. No one. This was his surrender. The final, complete, acknowledgement of the impossible thing she had become. I am not your enemy, Kalen, Nira whispered, and the words were entirely her own. A plea. No, he said, his voice flat. You are not. You are his chosen. For what purpose? I don't know. But you are a weapon he has left behind. He raked a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of profound weariness. And I am the hand that must wield you. The weight of that pronouncement settled over the room. He was no longer her jailer. He was her guardian, her commander. And she was no longer a prisoner. She was a standard, a symbol, a living effigy of a dead king. It was a cage of a different kind, gilded and revered, but a cage nonetheless. What happens now? She asked, her voice small. Now, we survive the night, he answered. The council will not take this lying down. The High Elder will see my actions as a betrayal of faith, a heresy. The other lords will see a threat to their power. They are right to be afraid. He looked at her, and a flicker of the old Valmir, the strategist, the king, glinted in his eyes. We will use their fear. We will let them whisper. We will let them plot, and we will watch to see which of them shows their hand. He was already thinking 3 moves ahead. The protector, the commander. He was honoring his king's last command. You need to rest, he said, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. You are pale. The ether that flows through you, his spirit, it must take a toll on a mortal body. She nodded numbly. She was more than pale. She felt translucent, as if the power was burning her away from the inside out. Food will be here soon, he said, moving toward the door. Eat, sleep, if you can. The guards outside are loyal to me, and therefore to him, to you. No one will enter without my permission. He paused with his hand on the iron latch. He looked back at her, one last time. The conflict was still there in his eyes, a storm of grief and duty. When you feel him, he said, the words tasting like ground glass in his mouth. When he shows you something, you will tell me. You will tell me everything. That is my price for protecting you. I will, she promised. He gave a sharp, curt nod, and then he was gone, the heavy door closing behind him with a quiet thud. Nira stood alone in the luxurious room, the silence pressing in on her. She walked to the window and looked out at the same view the king had once surveyed, the endless sea of snow-covered pines, his kingdom, and now, in some strange, terrifying way, her responsibility, true to his word. A quiet knock came a short time later. A servant girl, her eyes wide with fear and awe, left a tray of food just inside the door and scurried away without a word. Nira found she was ravenous. She ate the roasted meat and warm bread, the simple food grounding her, reminding her that she was still a creature of flesh and blood. She lay down on the bed, pulling the heavy furs over her. She expected to lie awake, for hours, her mind racing. But the exhaustion was a physical weight, pulling her down into the darkness. She did not dream of kitchens or scrubbing floors. She dreamed of battle. The roar is deafening, mud and blood. the clang of steel on steel, a warhorse screaming, the scent of fear, so thick it is a taste on the tongue. She is not Nira, she is Valmir. The weight of his armor is a familiar comfort. The great sword in his hand is an extension of his will. He stands on a low hill, his raven guard forming a circle of black iron around him. The enemy is a tide of wild clansmen, their faces painted with blue woad. He feels no fear, only a cold, thrilling certainty, a predator's focus. An arrow streaks past his head. Another thuds into the shield of the warrior beside him. Kaelin is to his right, a mirror image in black armor. His movements a brutal, efficient dance of death. Victory is close. The enemy line is breaking. And then a flash of silver from the tree line. Not the glint of a wild clan's rough-forged arrow. This is different. Polished. Deliberate. Pain. White-hot and blinding. It slams into his side, just below the ribs, where the plates of his armor join. Silver. It burns. It burns away his strength, his connection to his wolf, his very life force. He staggers. A gasp escapes his lips. He looks down, seeing the feathered shaft protruding from his side, a silver-tipped arrow. Kaelin roars his name, turning, his face a mask of horror. The world begins to gray at the edges. The sounds of battle fade into a dull roar. The last thing he sees is not the enemy in front of him, but the dark, quiet tree line from where the arrow came. A betrayal. Nira woke with a strangled cry, sitting bolt upright in the bed. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, the phantom pain in her side so real she clutched at it, expecting to feel the slickness of blood. The room was dark, save for the dying embers in the hearth. The dream had been more than a dream. It was a memory. His last memory. He hadn't been killed by the wild clans. He had been assassinated. A traitor in his own ranks. One of the lords who smiled to his face. Vorlag? Cress? Someone else? The echo of the king inside her was a tempest of silent, impotent fury. He knew he had been betrayed, but he had died before he could see the face of his killer. Nira threw back the furs, her hands shaking. She had to tell Kaelin. This changed everything. This wasn't just about succession. It was about murder. An assassin was still within the walls of the keep, walking freely among them. She scrambled out of bed and ran to the door, pulling it open. The two guards snapped to attention, their hands flying to their swords. Their eyes were wide in the torchlight of the corridor. "I need to see the commander," she said, her voice a ragged whisper. "Now! It's urgent." One of the guards hesitated, his duty warring with the urgency in her voice. He gave orders. "You are not to leave this room." "Then get him," she insisted, her voice rising. "Tell him the king's death was a lie." The guard's eyes widened further. He exchanged a look with his partner, who gave a curt nod. The first guard turned and ran down the corridor, his footsteps echoing in the pre-dawn silence. Nira waited, pacing back and forth in the doorway, too agitated to go back inside the room. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every distant sound was the footstep of an assassin. It felt like an eternity, but it was only minutes before she heard the heavy, hurried footsteps of someone approaching. Kaelin appeared, still dressed in his black tunic and breeches, his sword belted at his hip. He must have been awake. His face was grim, his eyes sharp with alarm. "What is it?" he demanded, stopping in front of her. "What lie?" "His death," she breathed, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. It wasn't the clansman. It was an arrow. A silver-tipped arrow. From the trees. It was one of ours. He was murdered, Kaelin. Assassinated. Kaelin's face, already so full of grief, seemed to collapse inward. The last, faint hope that his king had died a warrior's death, that his end had been honorable, was stolen from him in a single, brutal moment. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "I saw it," she said, her own voice trembling. "I felt it. The silver. The burn. The surprise." He knew, in his last moment, that he had been betrayed. Kaelin stared at her, and in his eyes, she saw the murder of his king play out a second time. The grief was swiftly consumed by a cold, deadly rage. It radiated from him, a palpable force. "Vorlag," he growled. "He is the finest archer in the northern territories." He was tasked with commanding the archers on the ridge that day. It all clicked into place. Lord Vorlag, with his cruel mouth and hungry eyes. He had been the most vocal in the council, demanding her execution. Of course he had. He needed the last echo of the king silenced before it could speak his name. He walks the halls of this keep as a hero, Kaelin said, his voice a serrated whisper. He mourns the man he murdered. The filth. He turned away from her, his fists clenched at his sides. He was a storm of vengeance waiting to be unleashed. The king's ghost within Nira resonated with his fury, adding its own phantom rage to the fire. We have no proof, Kaelin bit out, forcing the words through his clenched teeth. Only the word of a ghost. The council will call it a convenient fantasy. Vorlag will demand satisfaction. He will challenge me. Then let him, Nira said, and the voice was hers, but the strength was Valmir's. Let him issue his challenge. Let the whole pack see him for the coward he is, hiding behind politics when he is nothing more than a common murderer. Kaelin turned back to her, a new, terrifying light in his eyes. He saw the path forward, a brutal, bloody path, but a clear one. He reached out and gripped her shoulders. His hold was firm, intense. You are right, he said, his gaze burning into hers. We will not hide in the shadows. We will drag the truth into the light. But it cannot be my accusation. It must be his. He looked at her, and she understood. He didn't just want her to be a symbol anymore. He wanted her to be a voice, the king's voice. At the midday meal the hall will be full, he said, his mind working quickly, the strategist in full command. Lord Vorlag will be there, fat and content. You will walk in. You will stand before the high table. And you will accuse him. You will tell the entire pack what you saw. You will speak the king's truth. Nira's blood ran cold. He wanted her to face down a powerful, murderous alpha in a hall full of his allies. It was a death sentence. As if hearing her fear, Kaelin's grip tightened. I will be beside you. The Raven Guard will be at our back. But the words, the accusation, it must come from you, from him. He was asking her to kneel to a lie, to pretend to be the king, to fully embrace the role she had been given. He was asking her to put her life on the line based on a dead man's dream. But looking into his eyes, she saw he wasn't asking. He was commanding. This was his king's last battle, and she was the only weapon he had left to fight it. And the echo of Valmir Ravencourt whispered in the back of her soul, its voice cold and clear. Vengeance. The hours leading to the midday meal were the longest of Nira's life. Kaelin did not leave her. He stayed in her chambers, a silent, brooding presence pacing by the window as the morning sun crept higher, casting long, stark shadows across the floor. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the grim weight of their plan. A plan that felt more like a suicide pact with every beat of her heart. He had sent for different clothes for her, not a gown, not the finery of a lady, but a simple tunic and breeches of black wool, the color of the Raven Guard, of the late king. When she put them on, the soft, sturdy fabric felt like armor. It was a uniform, a statement. She was no longer Nira the servant. She was an instrument of the throne. As the time approached, Kaelin stopped his pacing. He came to stand before her, his face carved from granite. Are you ready? He asked. His voice was steady, but she could smell the storm of adrenaline and controlled violence brewing beneath his skin. She wanted to say no. She wanted to scream that she was a wolfless girl who had scrubbed floors yesterday, that she was not a king, not a weapon, not a vessel for vengeance. But she looked into his eyes and saw the unwavering loyalty he held for his fallen king, a loyalty that now, impossibly, included her. And she saw the desperation. This was his only chance to avenge the man who had been his brother. The king's echo within her felt his resolve and rose to meet it. It pushed her fear down, replacing it with a cold, clear sense of purpose. I am, she said, and her voice did not tremble. When we enter the great hall, all eyes will be on you, he instructed, his tone that of a commander briefing his soldier. They will see Valmir's colors. They will smell his scent. It will cause chaos. Let it. Walk directly to the high table. Do not look at anyone else. Find Vorlag. And do not stop until you are standing before him. He reached out, not to touch her, but to adjust the collar of her tunic, a small, almost paternal gesture that was so at odds with the violence of their purpose that it made her throat tighten. I will be right behind you, he promised. No one will touch you. Together, they walked out of the room. The 2 guards stationed outside fell into step behind them, their hands on their swords, their faces grim masks of duty. The walk to the great hall was a funeral march. Every guard they passed, every servant who scurried out of their way, stopped and stared. The whispers were a tidal wave, washing over them. The great hall was a cavern of noise and life. The long, Wooden tables were crowded with warriors and pack members, the air thick with the smell of roasted meat, wood smoke, and 100 overlapping scents. Laughter and loud conversation echoed off the high, vaulted ceilings. But as Nira stepped over the threshold, a wave of silence spread from the doorway, radiating outward. Conversations died. Laughter choked in throats. Heads turned, 1,000 eyes fixed on her, on the scentless Omega wearing the dead king's colors, radiating his impossible scent. And at her back, the commander of the Raven Guard, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his eyes sweeping the room with a look that dared anyone to speak. Nira's heart hammered against her ribs, but she remembered his instructions. Do not look at anyone else. Find Vorlag. She lifted her chin and scanned the high table, the elevated platform where the council members and high-ranking alphas sat. And she saw him. Lord Vorlag was in the center, laughing at something Baron Kress had said. A silver goblet in his meaty hand. He was large, florid, his scent a cloying mix of spiced wine and smug satisfaction. As the silence reached him, his laughter died. He looked up, and his eyes met Nira's. For a split second, she saw a flicker of shock, of confusion. Then, it was gone, replaced by a sneer of contempt. But she had seen it, the flicker. She began to walk. Every footstep echoed in the cavernous silence. It was the longest walk of her life. She could feel the weight of 1,000 stares, the pressure of 1,000 questions. She focused on Vorlag's face, on the cruel twist of his mouth, and let the king's cold fury guide her feet. She did not stop until she stood before the high table, the polished wood a barrier between her and the man who had murdered his king. Vorlag leaned back in his chair, a deliberate show of casual disdain. Well, he boomed, his voice oozing false amusement. The little kitchen mouse has come out to play. Commander, have you lost your mind, dressing this creature in the king's colors? It is an insult to his memory. Kaelin stepped up to stand beside Nira, his presence a silent, deadly threat. The only insult to the king's memory, my lord, Kaelin said, his voice dangerously soft, is the presence of his murderer at his table. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Vorlag's face darkened, the false amusement vanishing. What is the meaning of this treasonous accusation? He snarled, his hand dropping to the dagger at his belt. It is not my accusation to make, Kaelin said, turning his head slightly toward Nira. It is his. This was her moment. The fate of everything rested on what she said next. She drew a breath, and it felt as if she were drawing in all the tension, all the fear, all the rage in the room. She channeled the memory of the dream, of the burning silver pain, of the final, shocking betrayal. She looked directly into Vorlag's eyes, and when she spoke, the voice was not hers alone. It was layered, resonant with the phantom echo of the Alpha King. You stood on the ridge, she said, the words cold and clear, cutting through the silence. You commanded the archers, but one arrow flew from a different bow, an arrow tipped in silver. Vorlag's face went pale. He half rose from his chair, his knuckles white on the table. This is madness, the ravings of a possessed, broken thing. I felt it break my armor, she continued, the king's voice growing stronger, more commanding, taking over her completely. I felt the silver burn my blood. I looked to the tree line, Vorlag, the place where you stood, and I saw you. It was a lie. Valmir hadn't seen his face, but it was a lie forged from truth, and it struck its target with the force of a physical blow. Vorlag roared, a sound of pure, cornered fury. He shoved the table, sending plates and goblets crashing to the floor, and drew his dagger. You lie! Witch! I will cut the lies from your throat. He lunged. Not at Kaelin, at her. He was fast, for a big man, but Kaelin was faster. A blur of black leather and steel, Kaelin moved between them. He did not draw his sword. He met Vorlag's charge with his body, his forearm slamming into the man's throat. The sound was a sickening crunch. Vorlag choked, his eyes bulging, the dagger falling from his nerveless fingers to clatter on the stone floor. He stumbled back, gasping for air, clutching his throat. You raise a hand to the vessel of your king? Kaelin growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. You prove your treason for all to see. Vorlag's allies at the high table were frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and fear. The Raven Guard warriors stationed around the hall had their hands on their swords, their eyes on Kaelin, waiting for the command. Vorlag, his face purpling, his breath coming in ragged, wet gasps, finally managed to speak. Challenge, he rasped. I challenge. You, Kaelin. Trial by combat. For this? Slander. He was trying to save himself, to turn this back into a political dispute between two alphas. But Nira, or the king within her, would not allow it. She took a step forward, her eyes blazing with a cold, royal fire. You will not fight my commander, she declared, her voice ringing with an authority that silenced the entire hall. Your crime was not against him. It was against me, against the crown. She bent down and picked up Vorlag's fallen dagger. It was heavy in her hand. Her fingers, accustomed to scrubbing brushes, felt clumsy wrapped around the hilt. You want a trial by combat, assassin? She said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Then your challenge is with me. A wave of disbelief, of utter shock, rolled through the room. An Omega, a wolfless Omega, was challenging a powerful, battle-hardened Alpha Lord to a trial by combat. It was not just insane, it was unheard of. It was suicide. Even Kaelin stared at her, his eyes wide with alarm. Nira, no, he began. She silenced him with a look of command. A look that was pure Valmir Ravencourt. Vorlag, still gasping for air, began to laugh. A horrible, wheezing sound. You, he choked out. You would fight me? I will break you in half. You murdered your king with an arrow from the shadows, she said, her voice ringing with contempt. You are a coward, Vorlag. You have no honor left, but I will give you this one chance to die with a blade in your hand. The hall was a tinderbox, and she had just thrown a torch into it. The pack law was absolute. A challenge, once issued and accepted in this manner, could not be denied. Vorlag's eyes gleamed with a vicious, murderous light. He saw his escape. He would kill the girl, silence the king's ghost forever, and claim he was defending his honor. He straightened up, his breathing still ragged but his confidence returning. I accept your challenge, little ghost, he sneered. Then let it be now, she declared, raising the dagger. Here, before the eyes of the entire pack. Let them see the truth. Kaelin moved to her side, his body a tense shield. This is madness, he whispered fiercely, for her ears only. You cannot win this. He will kill you. He will not, she whispered back, and the certainty in her voice was not her own. The king will not be murdered twice. The center of the hall was cleared. Tables were shoved aside. A circle was formed. It was a makeshift arena, the packet's audience. Nira stood on one side, the dagger feeling small and inadequate in her hand. Vorlag stood on the other, drawing the long, curved blade he favored. He grinned, a predator's smile. She was going to die. The thought was a cold, hard stone in her stomach. Her own fear was screaming at her to run, to beg, to let Kaelin handle this. But the king's echo was a calm, cold fire in her veins. It did not know fear. It only knew the battlefield. It remembered 1,000 fights, 1,000 victories. Vorlag charged. He came at her like a bull, his sword swinging in a wide, powerful arc, meant to cleave her in two. Nira did not run. She did not try to block. Guided by an instinct that was not hers, she did the last thing he expected. She dropped. She fell to one knee, the big sword whistling through the air where her head had just been. As he lumbered past, off balance from the force of his own swing, she surged up. She did not aim for his body, for his armor. She drove the dagger, with all the strength in her small frame, into the soft flesh behind his knee. Vorlag bellowed in pain and rage, his leg buckling. He stumbled, turning to swat at her like a fly. But she was already moving, sidestepping his clumsy backhand, her movements fluid, economical. She was not Nira Elwood. She was a shadow, guided by the muscle memory of a master swordsman. She did not have his strength, his reach, or his skill. But she had his mind, his instincts. He lunged again, favoring his wounded leg. She dodged, letting his momentum carry him forward. As he passed, she slashed with the dagger, cutting the leather straps that held his vambrace, the armor on his forearm. He was bigger, stronger, but he was slow, enraged, and she was precise. The pack watched in stunned silence. They were not seeing an Omega fight. They were seeing a ghost dance. Her movements were Valmir's the low stance, the way she used her opponent's weight against him. It was unmistakable. Vorlag roared in frustration, swinging his sword wildly. He was tiring, his wounded leg leaving a smear of blood on the stones. He was fighting two opponents, the girl in front of him and the legend she was channeling. He made one last desperate charge. He feinted high, then swung low, trying to sweep her feet out from under her. The king's instincts saw it coming. Nira leaped, a small, agile movement, her feet clearing the sweeping blade. She landed inside his guard, too close for him to bring his longsword to bear. She was chest to chest with him. His sour scent filled her nostrils. His eyes were wide with shock and the first, true glint of fear. He had lost. He knew it. She looked up into the face of her king's murderer. She saw him not with her own eyes, but with Valmir's. And with the king's final, cold judgment, she shoved the dagger up, under his jaw, into the soft place where the neck meets the skull. There was no sound but a soft, wet sigh. Lord Vorlag's eyes went blank. The great sword fell from his hand, clattering onto the stone. For a moment, he stood there, impaled on her blade. Then his knees gave way, and he collapsed, a mountain of dead flesh at her feet. Silence. Absolute, profound, and ringing. Nira stood over the body, her hand still on the hilt of the dagger, her arm and tunic splattered with his blood. She was trembling, not with fear, but with the receding tide of the king's battle rage. Slowly, she lifted her head and looked out at the sea of faces. She saw awe, she saw terror, she saw belief. Then, from the ranks of the Raven Guard, one warrior dropped to his knee, then another, and another. Soon, all the warriors, the Betas, the Omegas, they were all kneeling. Not to a ghost, not to a memory, they were kneeling to the wolfless Omega who had just executed a traitorous lord in the center of the great hall. Her gaze found Kaelin. He had not moved. He stood watching her, his face a complex mask of shock, grief, and a fierce, burning pride. He saw what everyone else saw. The king's justice had been done. She had not just won a duel. She had claimed the crown. 6 moons had waxed and waned. The snows had receded, and the iron grip of winter was beginning to break. The scent of thawing earth and new life drifted up from the valley, a promise carried on the wind. Nira stood on the balcony, the same one from the king's memory. The cold stone was familiar beneath her hands. She wore no crown of wolf bone. It sat on a stand in her chambers, a relic of a past that felt a lifetime away. She was queen, not by blood, not by magic, but by the weight of a single, bloody act of justice. The keep was quiet now. The whispers had not vanished, but they had changed. They were no longer whispers of fear, but of awe. They spoke of the ghost queen, the wolfless alpha, the Omega who carried a king's fury in a servant's heart. They did not know the truth. Even Nira was only just beginning to understand it. The echo was still there, but it was different. It was no longer a voice in her mind, no longer a surge of alien power that hijacked her body. The rage had been spent on Vorlag's blade. The vengeance had been satisfied. What was left was a quiet strength in her bones, a depth of memory that was no longer a haunting, but a library. She could feel his instincts, his grasp of strategy when she sat in council, his eye for weakness when a petitioner groveled too deeply, but they were tools for her to use, not a will that used her. Valmir Ravencourt had been a storm. He had not possessed her. He had scoured her clean. In the hollow space where fear and worthlessness had lived, he had left behind the bedrock of his own strength. And upon that bedrock, Nira was finally building a home for herself. A heavy footstep sounded behind her. She didn't turn. She knew the sound of it, the weight of it, as well as she knew her own heartbeat. "The emissaries from the southern packs have agreed to the new trade terms," Kaelin said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of the jagged edges of grief it had once held. They were agreeable. "Your proposal was more generous than they expected. A strong pack does not need to bully its neighbors into trade," she said, her eyes on the distant, dark line of the forest. "It needs them as allies when the real threats come." The thought was a lesson from Valmir's memories, but the words were her own. He came to stand beside her, his presence a familiar wall of warmth against the chill of the evening. He draped a heavy fur cloak over her shoulders. His fingers brushed the nape of her neck, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. For months, he had been her shadow, her shield, her sword, her commander. The lines of duty between them were sharp and clearly defined. He advised her in council. He stood beside her in the great hall. He commanded the armies in her name. He was the perfect, loyal second. But in the quiet moments, in the spaces between the duties of the crown, something else existed, a current of unspoken things that flowed between them, deep and silent. "He is quiet today," Kaelin said. It was not a question. It was how they spoke of the ghost now. A simple acknowledgement of the third person who had once stood between them. He is always quiet now, Nira answered softly. Sometimes I think he is gone. And then the wind will blow a certain way. Or I will see a hawk circling over the peaks, and I will feel a flicker, not sadness, just memory, like the warmth from a fire that has long since gone out. She turned, her head to look at him. The lines of grief were still etched on his face, but they were softer now, worn smooth by time. The abyss in his eyes was gone. Now, when he looked at her, he did not see a ghost. He saw her. I served him, Kaelin said, his voice low, his gaze unwavering. For a long time, after that day in the hall, I told myself I was still serving him. I was honoring his last command, protecting his chosen vessel. I was loyal to a memory. He took a step closer, the space between them shrinking until she could feel the heat of his body, smell the familiar scent of steel and winter wind. But the scent of sorrow was gone. I was a fool, he whispered. I was kneeling to a lie I had told myself. I saw Valmir's justice, but it was your hand that held the dagger. I saw his strategy, but it was your voice that won over the council. I saw his strength, but it was your heart that endured. He reached out, not for her jaw, not for her arm, but for her hand. He took it in his own, his calloused fingers lacing through hers. His touch was warm, grounding, a choice. I no longer serve a ghost, Nira, he said, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. I serve my queen. He squeezed her hand gently. And I have for a very long time. Her breath caught. The scent that radiated from her, the king's scent, had changed too. It was still the storm, still the cold iron and winter pines. But now it was gentler. It was the smell of the first thaw, the scent of a dormant world waking up. It was Valmir's legacy, but it was Nira's life. And what of the woman, Kaelin? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Not the queen, not the vessel, just Nira. He lifted her hand, turning it over, and pressed his lips to the palm, a gesture of such profound, tender reverence it made her soul ache. His gaze lifted to meet hers, and the last of his walls crumbled, revealing the raw, unguarded heart of the man. She is the one, he said, his voice rough with devotion, who saved us all. The dead king had left a kingdom on the brink of collapse. He had left a brother consumed by grief, and a girl who believed she was nothing. And his final, desperate act, tethering his fading echo to the nearest spark of life, had given them all a future he would never see. He had been one river, fierce and powerful. She had been another, quiet and overlooked, running unseen in the dark. On the night of his death, they had crashed together. Now, the flood was over. The torrent had calmed, and where the two rivers had met, a new, stronger current now flowed, winding its way toward the open sea. Nira leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand still held fast in his. They stood together on the balcony, watching the first stars of evening appear in the deep velvet of the sky. The moon had seen their scars long enough. Tonight, she watched them heal.